Coming up, we're going to do something a little different today. Paul and I are going to reflect on the last 100 or so episodes. We're going to talk about things that we've learned. We're going to kind of showcase what's happened in the program, and we're going to use that to set the context for what we've got in store for the future. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/BSW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter. Rapid7 powers the practice of SecOps. Using shared data, analytics, and automated workflows, SecOps unites IT, DevOps, and security teams to make security an outcome of innovation. Rapid7 combines technology, expertise, and advocacy to drive vulnerability management, application security, incident detection, and log management for more than 7,000 organizations worldwide. Power up your SecOps practice with a free trial at rapid7.com/securityweekly. Do you have a website, an external presence, employees, an office? Any of these things can be compromised and attacked. How are you defending your assets? Have you penetration tested your public assets? Start 2018 by taking a proactive approach to securing your vulnerable areas. Black Hills Information Security has been helping companies find their weaknesses since 2008. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com and see how they can help you sleep better at night.
Hello and welcome back. It's Business Security Weekly. We've made it to episode 104, and it's Monday, October 29th, 2018. I know Paul's excited because it means Halloween is 2 days away.
Yay!
And I am, as far as I can tell when I looked in the mirror today, still Michael Sanarcangelo, still your straight talking guide to elevated performance and accelerated results. And from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. And, you know, Paul, knowing your background and your affinity for hip-hop, for the longest time I tried to figure out why you named the G-Unit Studios. Come to find out it's the G-Unit in the building. It's your friend of mine, Paul Asadorian.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, I did not choose the name. The name chose us, so to speak, because it starts with Unit A and goes all the way to I don't know, some other letter H or something like that. I think is the last one in the building. So yes, G-Unit Studios.
But it worked out.
It worked out
so perfectly. I loved it. All right. Well, so before we get into some of our conversations on all sorts of stuff, let me just give people two quick announcements. The first of which is something that's become a lot of fun for us here. If you're interested in quality over quantity, you want to have meaningful conversations, you can join the Security Weekly crew April 1st through the 3rd at Disney's Contemporary Resort for InfoSec World 2019. And you're going to get a lot of actionable information out of that. And if you want to get 15% off the main conference of the World Pass, just use code OS19-SECWEEK. Got it all right there. And you're going to do that. And April 1st, I can't imagine there'll be any shenanigans, but other than that, should be a fun time, Paul. So I know that'll be good. I know a lot of people look forward to joining that. The other thing we got coming up, and this I want to hear a little bit more about from you. So we got a webcast coming up with Signal Sciences, and it's called Which Way Should You Shift Testing in the SDLC? Now, it's going to be November 8th from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and you can sign up today, securityweekly.com/Signal Sciences. Which way should you shift testing? Tell me about that, Paul.
Yeah, it's interesting. So many resources out there, and analysts and security professionals and DevOps folks, DevSecOps folks, if you will, talk about shifting left. It's interesting. The furthest shift left example I've heard is that there's a browser plugin that your developers install, and when they're researching what software components to use in the software, it flags them with some kind of vulnerability analysis. And I see you're choosing that particular library, and by the way, that's got a history of 25 vulnerabilities. And then maybe you go seek out another one. It's like, well, this has a much better history. That's as almost as far left as I can put it. I mean, of course, there's threat modeling and other things that happened as far left as you can go. And then as you transition into the process, Signal Science is the one kind of posing the question, like, what do you do to shift testing right? Like, what happens? Because we know all software is going to have some level of vulnerabilities and risk when we roll it out. What else can you do shifting right? And what have been the changes in that arena? We've got things like bot detection, the whole like alphabet soup of WAFs and RASP and IAST and next-gen WAFs. And so what happens as you shift as far right as possible? And what are some things you can do that once the application is deployed really helps you protect that application? So we'll talk about kind of the benefits of shifting left and shifting right. I think it'll appeal to a wide audience. I think for this audience, senior executives going to get some insights into how to secure your SDLC at a high level. And then as we delve into the more technical aspects, enterprise defenders are going to learn where all the different categories are and what are some of the ways you can focus on those different stages in the SDLC. And then technical folks will benefit from our discussions about some of the new things, like a browser plugin I just mentioned. And, Signal Sciences will speak to the shifting right. You're going to get Larry's perspective, who tests and leads teams that test web applications today and what they find and what's working and what's not. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I think maybe some were confused on the title as exactly what we're going to be talking about. So hopefully, some explaining. Maybe we just need to pick a better title next time. It is going to be fun and interesting. Zane Lackey is awesome, by the way. Zane's the man. Just for Zane being on it, you should definitely tune in. His insights are spot on.
Yeah, well, listen, I'll tell you right now, just listening to you, I've been interested when I hear people talk about shift left and interested in how they interpret it. But I actually like the idea of talking about, but how far should you go? How far can you go? And what if you go the other way? There you go. Right there is the reason I would tune in and listen, just because I think that's the sort of contrast that our industry needs. It means that instead of just adopting something because it sounds good, everybody else says it, take time, understand the concept, figure out how it fits, get some ideas on how it fits for you, and then think about the opposite. What else could you do? So I love that. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Well, yeah, and it speaks to, I think, our collective frustration with what's best practice? We want to do what's best practice. I'm like, ugh.
Right. Yeah, you and I have a similar affinity for that phrase.
Yeah. It's like, what about what's new and interesting, and what about the problems you're solving, and what about the risk to your organization? Like,
there you go.
How do you define what best practice is?
Yeah. And listen, just to add a note to it, if you talk about something that's been done in accounting for 120 years, yeah, that's the best practice.
Right.
I'm in security. 20 years ago, you got laughed at if you told somebody you were in security. And if you looked the right way, they thought you were a security guard. So we don't have best practices. We might have good practices. You can certainly tell me we've got standard practices. You can tell me we've got always changing, completely evolving, never quite the same practices. I believe you on all those fronts. But here we are, episode 104. We've interviewed, I didn't even count, we've interviewed lots of people, great discussions, lots of insights, lots of breakdowns, lots of book discussions, and all sorts of other stuff. Paul, what stands out? Or do you even want to bring people back? Do you want to take a step back and talk about the whole genesis for what you and I started as Startup Security Weekly 2.5 years ago?
Yeah, it was interesting. We kind of had this like fleeting thought, and we're like, we should create a show, and because there's lots of startups in security, and we can talk about startup stuff. And I was in the midst of launching my startup, Active Countermeasures, and I was like, yeah, this is great. We'll talk about startups, and we had a lot of fun talking about startups, and we had a lot of fun interviewing people from startups, which many of those stand out certainly, and we still communicate with today because they're leaders and innovators in security, and they were on the show to share their journey, which is awesome. But then I don't know exactly what happened, Michael. I mean, we've always had fun, certainly doing the show, and going to continue to have fun doing the show. But at some point, like things changed. We realized that the audience were more senior executives and CISOs in security, and we decided to shift. And I can't quite put my finger on like the things we changed or how or why it changed, but my best guess, the way I explain it to people is, look, we talk a lot about leadership and communication, specifically, innovation's thrown in there. But if you look at just leadership and communication, That's something that a startup certainly needs, right? Because you may have a technical person transitioning into a leadership role. Now they have to communicate to employees. Now they have to communicate to the market. Now they have to communicate to customers, and they have to be leaders in their organization. So those messages always resonated with the startup founder. I think what we found is when you put someone in the CISO role, they have the same challenges, and they're eating up that leadership and communications because they have to communicate to the board, they have to lead a team, they have to communicate to other teams, and lead the people that work for them on how to communicate to the other teams, which I think is very critical in the CISO role. So since that message resonated, we shifted to Business Security Weekly. Did I capture that, Michael?
Yeah, I think it was pretty good. I mean, one of the things that was interesting for me, so at the time you were getting started with active countermeasures, and I was essentially rebooting my business.
Mm-hmm.
I had learned a lot, and it was interesting because that was at the time where I felt like I was being dragged into leadership. I need to stop saying it that way, but I want to just be clear with everybody. The communication stuff to me more or less came natural, and about 15 years ago, people started saying, "Hey, you're good at that. Can you teach us?" And I've spent countless hours and a good portion of my professional career really trying to understand the nuance of that. And I'd like to think I've done pretty well in that regard. Turns out, though, a lot of the stuff I did that went deeper. I wasn't content just wondering, oh, well, how do we communicate better? But it was, well, what do we communicate? But how do we know the other side understands it? How do we learn from them? And that was the foundation for a lot of stuff around leadership. And so when we came together for this program, it was fun because I was doing work with startups, and I continue to work with startups and vendors. And I was trying to help them navigate through some of their changes and look at some of the stuff that they were doing. You were doing that. And we were really interested in capturing a lot of the innovation that was happening in security. But every show, as you pointed out, we were definitely talking about leadership and communication and then highlighting the innovation. And I think part of what led to the change was it was two interesting things. We started to notice there were a number of people who would say, oh, I don't watch that show. I'm not in a startup. I don't care about startups.
Yep.
And at the same time, most of the feedback was, man, I love that segment on XYZ leadership. Oh, that was a great communication tip. Man, I love it when you guys talk about X, Y, and Z. That stuff is great. That's pure gold.
Right.
Even when we brought on people to talk about their startups, they would end up talking about some way that they had to make a decision or leadership or prioritizing, deprioritizing, handling conflict, and people loved it. And so as a result, you and I started looking at each other and said, it's interesting. We're still talking about startups, but people are getting confused, and they're really looking at us from a business perspective. And then what was kind of neat, at least as I always saw it, was if you're a business leader today, if you're a security leader today, right? And I always love that duality. What was always important to me, and it's kind of like we say in the introduction, it's the business of security to improve the security of business. You can't do one without the other. If you exist in a vacuum, you don't understand the way business works, you're not really going to be that effective at security. And if you're responsible for being effective for security, then you need to operate it more like a business. So it kind of was like this natural progression where we said, all right, as you pointed out, our audience, those really responding to it were in more of a leadership position or certainly aspired to a leadership position. And we still had people in the startup community paying attention to it because, as you pointed out, they were getting tips on it too. And it let us start to take a look at it differently. I'll tell you the big lesson I learned from it is and this is awkward to say, there's not a lot of differences, right? I work with enterprises. I hopefully one day soon, which means next year, we'll work with individuals, but I work with enterprises and vendors. Paul, the challenges aren't radically different. The approaches aren't radically different. Now, the way that you implement, right, where the rubber meets the road, that changes. That's going to change because every context, every situation is a little bit different. But what was kind of neat to me is as we started to make that pivot was suddenly, it wasn't just here, let me tell you about this startup. It was, hey, what problem are you solving? Where do you fit in the ecosystem? Who are the types of enterprise customers that you're willing and able to work with? We got to start talking to the enterprise people. Hey, what are the things that you've learned? How did you get to be a CISO? What did you learn along the journey? We started to look more at books and ways to improve ourselves. And I don't know about you, but for me, it certainly mirrored my own journey in terms of figuring things out and focusing. So it's been a fun canvas. Pretty much everything I've shared is either something I'm struggling through, learning from, reading about, understanding. I spent time this morning, Paul, journaling on some stuff, and it was like light bulbs popping off on, oh, wow, there's some neat stuff that we've done. And that's kind of how we got to where we are today and looking at those different types of things. And, I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, I feel like, my own internally here at Security Weekly leading the team, I think I went into it as I exited from Tenable and thought, well, I know what I don't like about when someone leads a team, right? And kind of had that as the foundation, which I think isn't a bad approach. But what I was missing that I gleaned from this show and in the book recommendations, right, was things I need to do and work on, right? And that was an awesome combination that I think, continues to really help me today. I tell you what, the feedback that we get on our book recommendations, Michael, is just awesome. I mean, I have everyone here internally, reading all of the books. I've spoken with our listeners at conferences and via email, and just the amount of help that it's given them. It's similar in a way that we approach Enterprise Security Weekly, right? In that we help people choose solutions and understand which solutions are best in this, like, thousands of vendors, like which ones are really well positioned to help you at a particular time. I think our book list does the same thing. There's tens of thousands, maybe millions of books you could read, right? And your recommendations, Michael, have steered us in the right direction as the ones that can help us right now with the challenges that we face in our careers and even somewhat in our personal lives as well. And that's just been amazing. And I don't know how formal we'll get with that. I know we've talked about a book club, Michael. I know you talked about as an initiative you may want to carry forward. I'm not opposed to it. But because I think of this, it's given so much value to our listeners, and I want to continue that.
I like that. What I'll say on that really quick, first of all, is I got some really nice feedback last week on how I've been slowly weaving some of the Stoic principles in some of the Stoic books. And I don't know how vocal I've been about it, but that's actually been a pretty big change for me in the last 2 years or so, is reading more of Stoic philosophy. Now, our good friend Jonathan Sander loves it when I bring that up. And for those who don't know Jonathan, and I know he's on the show last week for Enterprise Security Week, Jonathan is by training a philosopher and one of the smartest people I know, and loves having this debate with me. And always, every time I bring it up, he says, "Oh, ye noble Stoics," and wants to go have a good conversation about it. The way I've looked at it is kind of much more, and this is in your genre and mine as well. Bruce Lee, I loved his approach, which was borrow anything that works, discard the rest. And that's, I think, been a really good approach to looking at developing our own personal philosophies. What I've enjoyed about the Stoics is I think a lot of times in history they've gotten a bad rap as being too negative. And it really talks about what changes can we affect? What can we do with ourselves? How do we influence ourselves? How do we, as I like to explain it to my kids, in every situation, there's the emotion, and there's an event, and there's a space, and then there's our emotion, our reaction. If we can learn to play in that space and lengthen it even by a little bit, we get much more control over our emotions, and we start to realize, I can't control other people, but I can control me. I can control my emotions. I can control my thoughts and actions. And people who tell you they can't, they can if they want to, if they work it. It's not easy. In fact, I just finished a 30-day challenge. I've mentioned the book Unbeatable Mind. Mark Divine, the guy who wrote that, the Navy SEAL who wrote that, has something he calls Kokoro Yoga. And for whatever reason, they just did a 30-day challenge for October. So I got 1 day left, and I'll have done it all 30 days. And it's fascinating because I don't want to say I haven't learned anything new. I have, but it's the right timing. It's the right way. In fact, it's the best 30-day thing I've ever seen or done. I've done it every day. I've actually deconstructed how they did it to learn from it myself. Everything about it's been absolutely fantastic. But it's that type of you need to keep grooving it and repeating it. And that's where the book, The Talent Code, comes in. So if anybody's looking for something to read until I can get this book club off the ground, Talent Code is a great read. It's supposed to be a short read. I'm reading it slower than I'd like, but it's fascinating because once you start getting into how we learn, how we build those skills, anything, it's like my 6-year-old and the way that she's learning to read, it's instinctive. Like I'm watching going, holy cow, she's building myelin right now. Like this is how, wow, it's so exciting. So the short answer is yes. Here's what I can tell you that I've figured out so far. I'm trying now to read broadly, and I'm trying to read things too about like diet and nutrition and performance as alongside things like leadership and communication and learning, alongside some fiction. And I'm also now trying to get into some like memoirs and biographies and autobiographies and things like that to see what I can learn from people. Not really interested in salacious stuff as much as just lessons and things to learn. I have a new process, and I'm just putting it into place now. It's like a 3-tier process, right? Step 1, I just try to read a book, and I assure myself that if my brain cells just keep popping, I will go back and read it again, and I'll take better notes. And I've been working on building out something called a commonplace book. I'm a longtime proponent of the Cornell note-taking system. I'm actually looking at different ways to take notes. And then so what happens then is if I read a book and I like it, I'll slot it for what I call second read. Second read, I'm going to go slower. I'm actually going to have a plan for the book. And then as I read it, I'm going to take notes, probably put it into some sort of a mind map or note process. And those are the books that I'm probably going to be more likely to recommend to people. And then an even smaller set of those books, I'm going to then go through what I call third read. And for me, that's reading for implementation. And it's, I built them. I don't know if I ever shared it with you, Paul, but I built a model a number of years ago. I called it, I'm not great at naming models, information interaction model. But the idea was, how do you take information and get it to the place where it turns itself into knowledge or experience or reflection or whatever? And one of the things that's built into it, of course, is the way that you present information, what you do with it, and then how you reflect on it and build on it and build from it. I need to go dust that model off. I'll probably include that part of the book club. So the short answer is, it's definitely coming, and I'm reading books right now, and I'm taking notes, and I'm getting ready for it to start figuring it out. Don't have things figured out like timing, when I'm actually going to launch it, whatever else. I've been struggling to get back to some of my own writing. I cannot express how much I have bursting inside of me based on our conversations, based on the things that we've talked about, things that we've done, people that we've interviewed. There's all these nuggets that are just so beautiful in their gifts, and I want to go expand on those and showcase them and stitch them together. Lastly, on that topic, a lot of my own work has gotten a lot deeper in its focus, and as it does, I'm seeing the connections differently, and it's becoming a more rich experience for me. I'm eager and looking forward to being able to share that with other people as well. So the books will keep coming. We'll do some sort of a recommendations and light discussions around it, and best I can say right now is stay tuned. I had really wanted to get it done before. I think everybody knows I had a pretty interesting summer. It was part of life, but between the death of my father, then the evacuation for a hurricane, and we had 3 weeks of flooding. Kids were out of school for 15 days in a row. There was a point where they were out of school longer than they had been in school since the beginning of the school year. Everything now back to normal. Everybody's doing great. We're doing great. But it not only changed a lot of timing for me, it also gave me a chance to kind of take a pause, which was odd because I was drained, Paul, and I didn't have a choice but to figure things out. And now it's like, okay, we need to get it done. I want to do it right, and I'd like to get something going soon.
Yeah.
But, it's probably beginning of next year.
I think it's a good point that I want to spend a little time talking about tactics for our audience. And I know that, our listeners largely are listening to podcasts, most likely is how you're consuming the show in audio format. I think there's 3 different pieces of technology or tactics that I want to share and get your thoughts and opinions on, Michael. And the first is when we talk about books. I know a lot of folks that I recommend some of these books to, their immediate objection is, I don't have time to sit down and read a book. Look, I don't either. Okay, every single one of the books you've heard me discuss on the show is because I've consumed that in Audible format. And I use Audible. I mean, they're not a sponsor of the show, right? But I use Audible. Gets on my phone, plug it into my car, and even though I have a short, and don't let the short commute to work scare you. My commute to the office is 13 minutes, right? And so that's 13 minutes of listening that I can get in uninterrupted. Usually I'm alone in the car, right, when I travel to work. However, you can increase that because maybe you got to go stop and do an errand on the way in or home from work, right? So your commute increases a little bit. Or also when you're driving on the weekends to other locations, you're listening as well. I was just amazed, Michael, as to how many books I could consume that seemed daunting when the book is 4+ hours. And you'll be surprised when you're getting towards the end of the book. You're like, wow, I listened to that whole thing. That was really cool. Now, it doesn't let you take notes and stuff like that while you're driving. Don't do that because that's dangerous. But that's how I consume books. And I just wanted to throw that out there for our audience that, might be listening going, I'd love to get to some of those books, but I just can't. I don't have time to sit down. If I have time at night to sit down, I'm catching up on work, right? After the family time, right? Before I go to bed and early in the morning. If I started reading a book, especially like 10, 11 o'clock at night, I'd be asleep anyway. Right. So that's how my strategy for consuming the books, which I thought was an important tip for our listeners as well.
Well, yeah, let me build on it too, because I've really paid attention. You're not the only person I know who does that. And so I've started taking a look at it. And there's a couple interesting points to it. First of all, I've now started to purchase some more audiobooks myself. Same purpose as you. I don't have it. My commute's walking across the hallway. Mm-hmm. But I do have to drive the kids to their different events.
Yep.
And sometimes I'm driving by myself. Sometimes I have that time, and I've done the exact same thing as you. I pop it in, and 20 minutes a day here or there. I also find out sometimes if I am in the office and I don't want to say I'm doing something that's mindless, but I'm doing something that's very task oriented. I'll put some of that on in the background because my approach has been, well, gosh, if I'm learning, if I'm listening, if I'm picking up any one thing, that's better than not, or just, listen, I love music, but sometimes I thought it's a good approach. So I'm fully on board with that. I love it. Second part to it is sometimes reading something versus listening something, you pick up different things. So I still read, and even the books I have yet to buy any books just on Audible. I buy them on, I'm a Kindle guy, so I get them on Kindle. And then a lot of times, and they have now the Whisper Sync, which is great.
Yep.
And what I started to experiment with is having it play while I'm reading it. There's some early research on it that suggests it's a fantastic way to really assimilate information. Now, it's a little slower than if you just read it by yourself,
Sure.
violently, of course, but I'm experimenting with it and I like it. And then that's the other thing I've been doing is so I might read the chapter and then I'll go listen to it, or I'm listening to the chapter and then I'll go back and read a passage again. And I'm really liking that connection. Let me then say, everything I look at for the book club, I'm working to make sure that there is both a Kindle version as well as an audio version. And usually there's a hardcover or paperback. So whichever it is you like for your particular reading style,
Yeah.
it's good. You've got it, and you've got that ability to do it. And that's where too, like I'm trying to take a look at it, Paul. Like I want to not just make recommendations. I want to be able to explain why I'm making a recommendation, connect what I got out of it, maybe if possible, connect it to Straight Talk and how it can make a difference for
Yep.
people. And then also talk about some ways to take notes and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
so
And now it's interesting, Michael, along those lines, the second piece of technology that I'm in the process of converting to, which I haven't even told you about yet, is the process that we collectively use for collecting the stories or articles that we want to discuss on our entire network of shows. Right now is kind of, every host kind of has their own thing. And eventually we collect enough of the stories and we manually add them into the wiki. Moving forward, well, there's a couple of challenges with that, right? And to move forward with the way we're doing things, I don't think makes sense and makes life a lot more difficult for a lot of reasons. The first is the collaborative aspect, right? Because I don't really get to see them until they end up in the wiki. And because our shows are timely, that might not be but an hour before the show, right? And then the other thing is if I've got some stories that I want to talk about, I got to like send them to the other host in an email or some kind of other messaging service. And then you start looking at the features that are available for reading articles, right? And there's different technologies that on your phone you can flag. You can be reading in anything basically on your phone or in your web browser. When you find a story in your web browser, RSS reader, or in some app on your phone or a combination thereof, you want to flag it and send it somewhere. Now, to develop a mobile app and a browser plugin and all the back-end infrastructure to build all of that is obviously very, very costly and likely a product on its own. That's when I don't know why I haven't discovered this sooner, but I found this website called Feedly just by accident.
Oh, I love Feedly.
And I started testing it, Michael, and I was like, yeah, I want the pro version. And then I'm like, yep, I want the team version. So basically what that's going to do for Security Weekly moving forward is allow us to collaborate better on stories. You can share articles amongst your team. You can have public ones too. So I want to get to the point where I can publicize it and make it public for the audience to be able to go read and see what Paul's flagging, what the other hosts are flagging for stories would be great, right? It's got an API so we can integrate it into our system. The user interface is really awesome, and it doesn't require a clunky RSS reader on my desktop, which was kind of tying me down to a Mac OS operating system because the feed reader is really good. This does even better, and it's all based in your browser. You can one of the features that I always wanted too was you could make searches to go find information on all your feeds, but you could never exclude stuff. And there are certain things I follow where I'm like, I only want articles of this type. It actually has filters where I can exclude stuff. I'm like, oh my God, it was just like every problem I had with the process, it seemed Feedly had some solution for. And so therefore, I highly recommend it to our audience. You could include Google searches, RSS feeds, all kinds of stuff. It makes recommendations. It made it really easy to get the right information that I was after and do something, as Michael was talking about. You can add notes to each article and continue that thought process. So if you're out there and you're listening, you're a CISO and you don't have a lot of time to catch up, I thought this was a great way to create your own kind of account. And I've tried Flipboard, Instapaper, like 18 different RSS readers, 18 different websites, and this one is really one that impressed me. So I thought I'd share that tip with our audience as well.
Yeah, and let me tell you, on my iOS devices, I use a program called Unread, which is a great way to do it. I found that the Feedly experience on the website is my favorite. I love it.
Yeah.
But and some people like the way Feedly does stuff on their devices. I wanted a little bit more control over it, and I searched around, and Unread has turned out to be absolutely fantastic. But I love Feedly. And for those of you who want stuff, Feedly integrates then with Evernote. It integrates with OneNote. It integrates with Instapaper. It integrates with Pocket. So if you're finding that that's more of the direction that you like, or you have an existing workflow, it's fantastic, and it's been getting better. Like they're doing a great job. They came up pretty much, if you remember when Google Reader shut down, and everybody was like, what am I going to do? Feedly came out pretty quick, and I think they have a free stuff still. I just paid for the Pro when it got started. It's been great. Yeah. Super responsive, super friendly, super helpful, and as you pointed out, boards and all sorts of other things, and a lot of great stuff on it. Which actually leads me to a question for you, because I use Feedly. And I was testing out Instapaper versus Pocket as I go back to it later. So have you left Instapaper completely? Have you ever looked at Pocket?
It's a great question. Yeah, not yet. So some inside baseball. When I flag stories on Instapaper, so I still have to do that. When I'm in Feedly, I still have to pop them over to Instapaper because I wrote a custom Python script that pulls down stories from Instapaper folders, formats them for the wiki, and automatically through the wiki API creates a wiki entry for them, which is how, if you think about it, I do, 5 shows a week or whatever it is. Yeah, I think it's 5. And each one of those, if I had to prep stories, I need some automation in my process. So that was my first step to automation. And, moving towards the end of this year into next year, that'll be fully automated into our internal software that we're using. So it's not just going to be Paul's Python script anymore. It'll actually be integrated, and I think we'll solidify on Feedly for that. Because if I can just use Feedly, I'm good. I don't need any other services. I can just use one. That saves some monthly costs for not just me, but all of the hosts, right?
Yep.
And eliminates a lot of technology and has a lot of added benefits. So I think I'm just going to be flagging into Feedly, and then Feedly's going to, through an API, feed our system. And their API looks pretty well documented. I haven't worked with it yet, but I think it's going to replace a bunch of technologies in one fell swoop.
Which means now I'm going to go back and take a look at it again, because I knew about all those feature sets, and I, for some reason, thought that I needed to look for some sort of a reader, and maybe that's a better solution. So that's awesome. So I like that a lot. And for people who aren't doing that, I still think RSS is great.
Right? I do too.
Really simple syndication. I think it gives you the ability. I'm still a reader. We do video content. We do audio. I know most of you are just listening to this anyway. I still like it. I enjoy it a lot. I've recently tried to expand out into some more podcasts. In fact, my son's old enough now that he listens to podcasts, and we sit and we have great conversations. So I'm trying to do all that. But I'll tell you what, give me a good book, or give me a well-constructed article that I can read. And I still, the amount of information I consume quickly, hands down, I love it. That's one of my favorite ways to do it.
Yeah, and then the third piece of technology, which I feel like my use case is pretty specific, although I can imagine if you're a CISO, you attend many different meetings. And I think we've all had this problem. And again, none of these people sponsor the show, right? We're fully endorsed by security companies, and that's going to be the focus, right? But so I bought the Remarkable tablet based on Keith's Hoodlet's recommendation. And I like it because the problem it solves is I don't lose notes. And I'm sure if you're a CISO, or really if you've worked in any career in IT, right, or for a corporation, you go to a lot of meetings, you take some notes, and then what happens? Like your notepad fills up, and then it gets lost and it's in a drawer, and you're like, I need to go back to that note. Like, where was that? And you end up losing a lot of notes. What I like about Remarkable is it's really hard to lose a note because it's all captured on the digital tablet. I tether it to my desktop. I can pop open all the PDF files, send them to people, archive them in Google Drive. Now, that's manual. What I really wish Remarkable had was when I take a note, I want to just send it to my Google Drive, right? So it's in the cloud. They really don't have any kind of cloud storage that I could find. So even still, I think that the cost of the what do those tablets cost? Like a couple $100 or something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe yeah. To have that and have it be able to not lose, like make it hard for me not to lose notes. Also, when I write on it, it does feel like I'm writing on paper. I tried lots of different tablets for note taking. Didn't like any of them until I found Remarkable. So if you're, especially an executive, you're attending a good number of meetings, I really like it for note taking. Sure, you could use your computer, but that's kind of distracting, because you got a lot of things happening on your computer. Remarkable is nice because you're not getting pop-ups from Slack or email, while you're taking notes. So it kind of forces you to focus, which is good. So yeah, I like the Remarkable tablet, Michael. I don't know. I know you've done some experimenting. Do you have the pen for the Apple tablet?
I do.
I thought that was kind of. I didn't like the way it wrote on the screen.
It is the best of the options that I've had, and I have not yet been in the same space with you to try your Remarkable tablet, and that's on my list of things to potentially try. People keep telling me as well that I should get the Surface Pro or one of the Microsoft devices. But let me tell you about a trend that I'm seeing more and more, and I kind of like this trend. More and more corporations and organizations are saying, okay, laptops down at the meeting, phones down, devices down, but they'll let you use your tablet if you're taking notes by hand, not typing the notes. And I keep pointing out the research, and I have a whole little section on this I do with my clients. The research is actually conclusive. Now, we don't know why. All we know is, like, if we're doing a brain scan, Paul, and you're writing by hand, it's firing different neural circuits in your brain than if you're just reading it or typing it. Now, I've also been pretty clear for all of my affinity for handwriting, right? And I really talk about this a lot, but as a kid, I practiced calligraphy for years and for hours. Like, that was my meditation at some level. So I'm regarded as having nice handwriting. I actually journal by typing, and it keeps it encrypted and locked up, and it just lets me free flow and go wherever the hell I want. And I've thought about trying to do things like dictation and stuff, and it just, not for journaling. For journaling, for me, my fingers typing, and I'm not a fast typist, that works out really well for me. But for note taking, when you're listening to other people, oh man, I find it's great. And the Remarkable, I think, is a great solution. I think a lot of people are migrating toward Surface Pro. I'm actually excited. So today's the 29th. Tomorrow, Apple's got a big new announcement. We're expecting to see the next round of iPad Pros, and people are joking it's the next pencil, and they hope they call it the number 2 pencil. Apple won't do that, but that's funny as hell, and I hope that they do it. I will tell you, it's the best of the experiences that I've had, save that I've not written on a Remarkable, and I've followed that closely. And the only reason I haven't gone that route or adopted it is part of what's been my goal this year too is to reduce the stack. And I took a couple of trips where I came and visited the studio and stuff. I didn't carry a laptop with me. I'm actually oddly back to carrying a laptop, and I've got the latest model of the MacBook Air, which means it really hasn't been updated. And I'm actually trying to debate, like, I'm curious to see what else Apple announces tomorrow, and or thinking I might go to a MacBook Pro. And what I find is it's the weirdest things. Trying to create a presentation, still easier on a laptop. And I use the Noun project. Their iconography is great. People are still using pictures, and it's great. I find icons are great. Icons are universal. And if you take time and you find the right icon, so simple, at least for me on the Mac, so simple to put those things together. So I do that. But I find some stuff now I prefer to do on the iPad. And I still use Google, but I actually switched over to Office 365, and they all work really well together. Now, you would think that means I use OneNote, and I cannot. It doesn't work for me. I can't get my head wrapped around it. So I use GoodNotes. I use an iPad Pro. I use GoodNotes. I use the iPad Pencil, whatever they call it, the Apple Pencil, and it works. I mean, sometimes it's a little clicky, to your point. Sometimes it's a little clicky. Sometimes there's not the resistance you'd like to see from it. So I'm curious, but what I'm excited about is pretty much every year or so, these things get better, and I expect Remarkable will get better. Everything around it gets better. But I love those devices. I love those concepts. I love those ideas. I think writing by hand is really important. But as you've pointed out, writing by hand, just getting notes that pile up. Yeah, it doesn't work. Getting the notes and then scanning them and trying to put them someplace, okay, works better, still requires a step. Just capturing them once and digitally, and then some of these things now can do handwriting recognition. Some of those engines are getting scary good. Yep, that works. I dig that a lot. Here's my challenge, Paul. I've actually also standardized off on a couple different programs on the Mac that can do like writing, and they can collect ideas, and I use them to capture field notes when I'm working with clients and client notes and everything else. I'm now trying to figure out how to either link or at least better from a taxonomy perspective. So when I use Ulysses. When I use that versus when I'm using GoodNotes versus when I'm doing something else or sorting files or keeping documents, that's the next step for me in terms of trying to get everything down to a very simplified set of things to use in order to move faster. But
Yeah,
that's
I think and there's some upcoming announcements. Actually, I think we're slated to announce it on Thursday. We'll certainly talk about it next week on the show. With my focus needing to be technical to develop content for a lot of the shows, I'm almost all Linux now. Both my laptops are Linux, my phone's Android, and I'm pretty much getting ready for my desktop here, which is a Mac, to cut over to Linux. Because I don't know, I've always been a Linux user. I'm just more comfortable on that platform. You do lose out on certain applications, which increasingly are becoming less important for me. As I mentioned, I found Feedly and other things that make it so I don't need those desktop apps that I've been relying upon on macOS. And I just the directions Apple's going in doesn't align with my goals. So that, and you can get a lot more bang for your buck on a Linux system. And run multiple VMs and containers, which is stuff I need to do today more for development and testing purposes. So I'm pretty much moving all Linux. I mean, and the bummer is things like the Remarkable app that lets you tether it don't work in Linux yet. Maybe that'll come out soon. But if I gotta fire up a VM for that stuff, I'm okay with that. So that's my direction. I'm excited that I'm going to be all Linux probably sometime next year.
I have loved for these last 2.5 years how much our journeys have paralleled each other. You and I, and this is more off-camera stuff, but in life, Paul and I have a lot of really interesting, almost surprising parallels. And in the show, like we're working on technology simplification, we're working on process stuff, we're working on ways that we do these. It's been thoroughly fascinating, and I've thoroughly enjoyed talking with you about these things and sharing it with our audience. So there are some changes, and you already previewed there's going to be a big announcement coming up this week, and I think people are going to be real excited about that, even if they don't completely comprehend why. And then we'll try to break that down for them next week. But what it does mean as well is that there'll be some changes for this program, all good stuff, all natural evolution of stuff. And fundamentally, it's going to allow me to do things like work on the book club and take to these concepts and write them and figure them out. And some of it, we don't know how it's going to unfold yet, but it'll definitely, we'll make sure that it's good for everybody as it goes. Is there anything else you want to tease people with so they can do it next week and see?
I think that's a pretty good teaser, and I think people will be anxiously awaiting the news. Which is going to be awesome. I mean, so obviously the show.
I'm excited, Paul. I got to tell you, I'm excited. Everything about it, on a personal level and on a business level, it's all great stuff. And so I'm excited for the announcement. And to be fair, we're not teasing people that long. They've just got to wait a couple days. They can figure it out and break it down for them next week. So it's fair. And we're trying to signal, guys, there's going to be some changes, but that's good. Changes are always good.
Change is good.
Hey, I do have a question, though, because one of the things that we've also tried this year is we've tried different segment lengths, and we've tried different segment numbers, and we've tried looking at formatting and stuff. And one of the things that took, I don't know if people understood how much time it took. It took a significant amount of time was to try to do those innovation updates. Doing those every week, man, that was getting tiring. So then we tried to collapse it a little bit, and then life lately has just gotten in the way. We haven't done it. Do you miss them? If you're listening to us, if you're watching us, do you miss those updates? Were they useful? Did you like hearing about who was getting funded, right? I mean, Red Hat was a big pickup over the weekend from IBM, but there's no shortage of companies. There's no shortage of innovation. We're going through a cycle right now where we're seeing a lot of it consolidate or get acquired. It's all great stuff and good news. But did that actually help you? Our thought process on this was, we're going to talk about leadership and communication, of course. And oh, by the way, we're still going to talk about innovation, and we're going to do it two ways. We're going to look at what innovation actually means, and then we're going to go show you in our industry who the innovators are and who's getting the bets placed on them and who's progressing down that pathway and what to look for and how to work with these companies in a way that protects you and protects your interest and helps them advance and helps our industry advance. That's very noble. Sounds really sexy when you say it, especially if you say it the right way. Did you care? Did you listen to it? Did it help you? Did it cause you to take an action? Did you look at any of these companies, or was that the part where you're like, okay, they're done for the week, and you clicked it off and went to next time? I'd love to know, of the things, like when you look at the last year or two, is there anything that we stopped doing that you miss? Is there anything that we're still doing that we go ahead and kill? And is there anything that, maybe we need to reevaluate either how we do it or when we do it or how it works? That'd be great feedback. And you can send that, right? The easiest for me lately is just email if you can figure it out, or just connect me on LinkedIn. I respond back. I'm off Facebook. I still use Twitter. I'll happily respond to you there. You can send me a direct message on Twitter. Happy to do that as well. And what you'll probably start seeing from me on Twitter more is more of a focus on positivity. One of the big changes I've made, Paul, that's going to carry forward is to lead with love. Our industry, we get enough bashing, we're enough told of what we did wrong. And if we think about it, right, we're good with our kids. Oh, you did good. I'm real proud of you here. Let's do that. But as adults, we don't say to people, hey, good job. We don't say, hey, I like the way your shoes look. Hey, man, I like, your nail color. Or I like the color of your shirt. We don't do that. Well, I'm consciously doing that. So if you do engage with me on Twitter, you're going to start seeing more of that. I'm going to repeat some of the Stoic stuff and some of those quotes. Always going to be happy to get into conversations, but I'm really going to focus more on how do we get to be better leaders? How do we solve the right problems? How do we get to be better leaders? How do we communicate, but positively? How do we communicate in a way that helps everybody else and do those types of things? So I'm off of a lot of the social media, but still on LinkedIn, still on Twitter. Still send me an email. You can hit Paul. He's at Security Weekly. He's in. I know you've given out the email address before, but you've got that as well. And there's plenty of ways to give us that feedback. And frankly, I think almost everybody who's sent us a message over the last 2 years, they got a response.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, with respect to the
it just got lost.
Yeah, with respect to the innovation update, we've been covering some of that in Enterprise Security Weekly, and then if we cover it in this show, we'll go lighter on that or leave it out of Enterprise. So we've been kind of straddling two shows with that. If our audience feels strongly, in either way, like if you want to see it, and sometimes it's on this show and sometimes it's on Enterprise, everyone's cool with that, or if you have strong feelings about which show it should, or if it should be on both shows when we talk about it in a different light, our audience will drive that. I think the important thing is we definitely want to cover it on the network. It's just a question of how often and where, and that's really, we want to hear your feedback.
Yeah, I mean, you got a great point.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I've loved about what you've built, Paul, is we have the potential between ESW, BSW, ASW, Paul Security Weekly as a quad. One's more community focused, one's more business focused, one's application focused, one's enterprise defender focused. Cool. That means you've always got that ability. We can take a topic. You've got at least 4 different ways to take a look at it, including, broad perspective, community, leadership. I've always liked that. So that's a great point. If you think some of these things belong on one show versus the other, or a segment should cut across the programs, these are the things that are going to elevate that programming, and that's always going to help out and take a look at it. So that's exciting stuff. Oh, and the last piece, Paul, 2 things, if I might, because I teased it all summer, and then, like I said, everything kind of went sideways. So the Value Prop scorecard, that's still happening. And in fact, it's slated. I started working on it pretty aggressively last week. And what I'm actually doing, and so those of you who sent me a note, and I'll follow back up with everybody. If you wanted to be part of beta testing it, that will still happen soonish. But what I also did, and this is kind of interesting, Paul, is I'm looking at, right, so Value Prop is a subset of Straight Talk. And what I'm talking about are Value Prop conversations. And what I've learned is that there's a way to work with the vendor community to start by looking at what works for them, right? The problem that they're solving, but in the words of some of their top customers, the customers they want more of, people just like that. And then we work them through a process where we actually help them form up their ability to have the Value Prop conversation. And then from that, we package it up, right, using a structure, which is one of the really neat things of using a structure. We brief everybody internally, and we help them brief people externally. And then we give you guys 30 days to call and have those conversations, right? It's an invitation to the conversation. And then you give me the feedback on how they did. Did you like it or not? Cool. But actually going to use that scorecard to score them. And then I'm going to ask you a little bit more, like 3, 4, 5 questions about the process overall. And then I'm going to be able to give that feedback back to the vendor. As I'm going to start launching this next week or 2. I've talked to a couple of vendors that are interested, and now it's just that, figuring out, putting it together, run 3 or 4 people through it. We'll start figuring out. The scorecard beta will come out somewhere in and around that. So maybe let's say the next month, but definitely between now and the end of the year. And then those 2 things work in hand, and that gives us the ability. My goal with this program is to take a lot of the friction out of the system. And people initially look at that and go, oh, well, that's good for the vendors. Well, of course it's good for the vendors. Mm-hmm. But let me tell you what, it's good for you in the enterprise too, because if they've got a valuable solution to solve the problem that you've got right now in a way that is positive impact, not negative impact, If you can reduce that friction on your side and move that faster, you'll unlock your value quicker and solve the problem faster. That's good for everybody involved. And that's what we're trying to do. I'm trying to get to that level of transparency where we can cut through some of the hype like we've been doing on this show and like I think you do across this whole network, but give people some structure, some examples, show them how that works. And that's actually become one of my top focuses. On the enterprise side, the big breakthrough I've had in the last 2 weeks is what I'm now calling the context of security. And it's really setting up what's security's role, what's its place, how does it function in this organization? And that's good for the security team and the rest of the organization. And then it actually clarifies the focus of the team, helps us prioritize the effort, and it lets us really get into that phase where we're executing the right stuff, but in a best next step capacity. So that's where a lot of my focus is going to be. And I'm going to keep creating insights from all that and really working to elevate our industry on those fronts. I feel like I've kind of found my sweet spot. And in fact, of all things, Paul, I figured I'm going to sit down and kind of work through the context of security for my company, myself and my company, and figure out all those pieces over the next couple of weeks. So those of you looking for me on, where's the value prop thing? Where's the scorecard? It's coming. What are these other things you've talked about? Trust me, it's, new website in the works, all this type of stuff, working through it pretty consistently, but honoring all of it. Like it was the right path. And now I'm on the right trend and we're making it all work. So it's exciting stuff. It's a good time for change. Like there's so much good stuff happening. And I look forward to sharing more of some of those details with everybody next week as we figure it out. Any parting thoughts for today, Paul?
No, looking forward to the announcement. And so stay tuned for more.
All right. So remember this, everybody. Exceptional leaders elevate the people around them. To me, all right, and this is so core to everything that we do. That means take the time this week. So here's to your week of investing in yourself, because then the people around you will be better. Everybody wins. It's a great week. We'll see you next week. Big stuff happening.